Guys, today we're going to talk about the progressive presidents. So we looked the other day at the policies that the progressives were kind of seeking out and some of the democratic reforms in that. So now we're going to look at kind of what that looks like in practice with these presidents, okay? So we're going to talk about Roosevelt and then Taft and then Wilson. All right, here we go. So, who was Roosevelt? Roosevelt was an interesting guy. So, he was a Spanish American war hero. So, remember, he led the Rough Riders up San Juan Hill, and that was the major turning point in that war. So, he's very, very, very popular as a result of that. To date, he's the youngest president. So, he became president at 43. So, when McKinley was shot, he was 43 years old. And he later, that title will later go to Kennedy in 1960. He was 42 when he was elected president. He was energetic, he was very, very popular, and that's the big reason why he became the vice president in the first place. But he was a major attention hog, so he had to be the center of attention all the time. It was said that he was the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. Okay, that he was the one that everybody came to see. He loved to hunt, fish, hike, box. He was very into nature, so we're going to see that with some of his policies. And he will expand the power of the presidency through his what he called the square deal. Okay, and this was designed to keep the wealthy and the powerful from exploiting the poor and ruining small businesses. Okay, so he's going to break up the trusts that he found were cheating consumers or running small businesses out of business. So he the issue with this that people had with this was it was basically the government was picking the winners and the losers in regards to business. So businesses he liked that were trusts were fine, but businesses he didn't like that were trusts he broke them up. But he felt that, like I said, that some trusts were more efficient, worked in the favor of the public, so he let them be. So these trusts could be preserved as long as they did business fairly, according to him. Okay, so but he was known as a trust buster. Roosevelt's attorney general is going to file suit against the Northern Securities Company. That's a railroad company. And the Supreme Court is going to deem it an illegal trust and then force it to split into smaller companies. And so this was the one of the largest to be busted by uh, TR, as he was known, or Roosevelt, and one of the first uses of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So we talked about the Sherman Antitrust Act and some more recent companies like Microsoft, Apple, Google that have come under fire under that. He also encouraged Congress to pass the Elkins Act and the Hepburn Act, and basically this increased the power of the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. Okay, so it increased the power that of trade between states. As far as labor relations go, so he helped resolve the 1902 Pennsylvania coal strike. Mine owners refused to listen to the workers, and so Roosevelt stepped in and threatened to take over the mines with the help of federal troops unless they came to an agreement. So they eventually came to an agreement because they didn't want the federal troops to come in and and take over their business. So the workers ended up getting a small pay raise and a 9-hour workday. So this is the first time that the federal government actually sides with the workers in a labor dispute. So the Pure Food and Drug Act. So after reading The Jungle, so we talked about the Jungle a little bit in the last one. So the Jungle was by Upton Sinclair, and it looked at the meatpacking industry and the really gross practices that were happening with in regards to meatpacking and the poor treatment of the workers and things like that. Um, so after reading that, he is going to call for heavy regulation and inspection of food and drug producers. So, for example, he's going to get the 1906 Meat Inspection Act passed. And this is going to lead to the Pure Food and Drug Act, which later becomes the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, which still exists to this day. Okay, so the FDA regulates quality of food. Okay. So Roosevelt loved the great outdoors, and he hung out with the founder of the Sierra Club. That was John Muir. That's him right there. Okay, and basically, a lot of his policy was to conserve or protect areas, resources for later, um, to conserve, not preserve natural resources. Okay, so he wanted to protect them for use for later, public use, not leave them untouched. He wanted people to be able to go and experience nature, not be allowed to go certain places and things like that. So the National Reclamation Act of 1902 will give the federal government the power to decide where and how water would be distributed, especially in the arid Southwest. So he's getting very involved in the environment, and he's going to create a lot of national parks, including Yosemite. So moving on to Taft. So after, um, well, okay, so Taft, he was his Secretary of War. He was Roosevelt's Secretary of War, and he seemed to be handpicked by Roosevelt. He busted twice as many trusts as Roosevelt, and he dropped the distinction between the good and bad trusts. Okay, so he didn't. So things like Standard Oil and U.S. Steel, where Roosevelt was like, "Yeah, you guys are cool." Taft's like, "No, you're still violating the law. You can't do that, whether or not you're having good business practices or not." And he made a lot of other policies that got on the nerves of Roosevelt. So Roosevelt decided to run again for president. Okay, so Taft was elected in 1908. Okay, and then he is going to run again against Roosevelt again. So this is going to happen with the election of 1912. So Roosevelt, he didn't have a party to run for, so he's going to start his own party. It's the Progressive Party, and it was nicknamed the Bull Moose Party. And Taft is going to run for the Republicans, and then Woodrow Wilson is going to run for the Democrats. And he's going to run on a progressive platform that he called New Freedom. Okay, so he's going to attack what he called the triple wall of privilege. That's basically tariffs, banks, and trusts. That's the triple wall. Eugene Debs did run for the Socialist Party, and he was a pretty big name at the time, and he did show some growth on that end of the political spectrum. So, far left, you have Debs, and then you have Wilson, and then moving over a little more right, you have Roosevelt, and then farther right, you have Taft. So, because Roosevelt and Taft split the Republican vote, Wilson wins in a landslide. So, Wilson becomes the president in 1912. So who was Woodrow Wilson? Woodrow Wilson was an intellectual. He was a president of Princeton University. He was a major progressive. Before being elected to president, he was the governor of New Jersey. And he was the son of a Virginia minister. He lived most of his life in Augusta, Georgia. He was the first Southerner to win presidency in 60 years. It is believed that he was probably racist because he didn't really attack the Jim Crow legislation in his progressive reforms. So it's pretty widely believed that is true. Underwood Tariff Act of 1913. So he's going to cut tariffs on foreign goods to allow for more competition with American goods. What that does is when you cut tariffs on one end, usually it's reciprocal that they will cut tariffs on the other end, on the other side. So that means that tariffs are being cut, like with, for example, like Britain. If there's a tariff with them, they might cut the tariff that they have as well. So that encourages more free trade, is basically what that does. It included a provision for graduated income tax, and so the 16th Amendment is going to be ratified, and basically that sets up the income tax. So that doesn't exist until 1913 with the 16th Amendment. Foreign relations, domestic policy. So he faced great foreign relations issues during his presidency, which we'll talk more about in the next unit when we get into World War I. But it's his domestic policy that we're really going to care about. So he's going to use the expanded power of the presidency that Roosevelt established to pass more of his domestic policy decisions on. And so these are the ones that are regulating the economy. And so one of the things he's going to do is he's going to create the Federal Reserve Board. Okay, so the Federal Reserve is a central bank. Okay, and that's going to reform the entire way the whole banking system worked and operated than it had before. Okay, so it's a central bank now. So there's 12 Federal Reserve regions. Okay, St. Louis is Region 8. Okay, but there's a board of governors. There's 7 governors that head the board of the Federal Reserve. There's a chairman and a vice chairman, and then there is 5 other Federal Reserve governors. Okay, and so they're the ones who are in charge of it. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it does here in a second. So, the Federal Reserve System, it's designed to prevent too much money from being held in the hands of one person, one bank, or one region. And so it supervises banks in order to make sure they are well run. So one of the ways they do this is they set interest rates so that they don't fluctuate wildly over time from bank to bank. So if one bank has a lot of money and another bank doesn't, what happens is that bank with a lot of money can have lower interest rates, and so more people will go to them and borrow from them because it's cheaper to, and then that's going to drive the other banks out of business. So what the Federal Reserve does is it sets a minimum that like on hand money that banks have to have, and then if like one bank doesn't have enough, maybe they had a lot of people took out deposits that day. So if one bank doesn't have enough, what they can do is they can borrow from another bank. And then what they'll do is they set interest rates. So the Federal Reserve actually lets banks borrow from them, and then they set interest rates. And so if they set the interest rate at like 2%, then a bank could go and they could set their interest rate for like a mortgage or something, or a car loan or whatever, at like 2.5%. Okay, because it's always going to be a little bit higher than what they're borrowing for because they want to make money off of that. Okay, so this helps to manipulate the economy. It helps to manipulate the government. It's a very political thing, even though it's designed not to be. So the governors, they're appointed by the president, and they have to be approved by the Senate. Okay, so it's not, the thing is they have no boss. Like the government, they cannot regulate the Federal Reserve. They do that themselves. So their only regulation is through appointing governors. The Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914. So this is going to strengthen the Sherman Antitrust Act by spelling out like specific activities that corporations are not allowed to do. So it's preventing unions from being attacked as trusts, and this is going to help the laborers to organize. And there's really going to be a major push for organization around this time, moving into the 20s and into the 30s. Then the Federal Trade Commission, that's going to happen in 1914. So this is an organization that was used to monitor trade practices that might lead to a monopoly. And so the FTC is also kind of a watchdog for false advertising and labeling. And so if you like put out an advertisement that says like if you're like a hand sanitizer and it says it kills 100% of germs, well, nothing kills 100% of germs. So they always put like 99.9% of germs, so things like that. You can't make false claims. So progressivism's legacy. So the government reforms like the initiative, the referendum, and recall. So we talked about those in the last set of notes, and then amendments like the 17th and 19th Amendment. All those things are going to increase voters' influence on the government and legislation. Also, they're going to create the lasting idea that governments can and should take action to fix problems within the nation. So before, the government was just there. Before progressivism, the government was just seen as this thing that kind of kept people safe and took care of like roads and police and things like that. Now, it's the government's job to fix problems. Okay, if there's a problem in society, then the government should fix it. So it kind of shifts the role of government and gives a lot more power to the government as a result. So anyway, so it's their job to fix the problems within the nation and to protect Americans' private and work lives, health, and consumerism. Okay, and then they're going to create federal agencies which still watch over the economy and regulate business, like the Federal Reserve, and commerce and protect the environment. Okay, so we have different laws that protect the environment. We have like the EPA now and things like that. So, all right, homework is 10 test questions. So make sure you make at least 5 multiple choice and make sure you answer them all. Have a good day.